in my participation in a series of workshops on the working life. So I appreciate that too. Okay, so I guess this works too. Okay, China has been aging very rapidly. In year 2000, we're officially an aging society. People age 65 and older reached 7%, and by 2026, this share will double to 14%. And as you all know, the biggest challenge, the financial challenge, is how to support these older people. And the share of people aged 20 to 59 over those 60 and over is about 5 and will decline to 1.4 in 2050. So the biggest policy question is where retirement is heading. Do we have potential for raising employment rate for the elderly? And to predict the future, the first step is to see what the trend has been. And so this is the first goal of this research. And then the second goal is whether we can explain the past trend in an effort to understand how the future will be. We're not so lucky as in the United States. We didn't have a representative cross-sectional data where we can see the trend. And what I'm showing you today is a retrospective survey that is for the first time records the history, the recent history. So this is the CHARS. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of it. It's a HRS type surveys harmonized with the HRS family of surveys. And we started in 2008 in two provinces, and those samples were followed up in 2012. In 2011, we started the national baseline survey. And we did the 2 more rounds, 2013, and this year we're just finishing up the third regular wave. But between the second and third waves, we did this life history survey based on this CHARS sample. This CHARS has been funded by a National Institute on Aging, China Natural Science Foundation, Peking University, China Medical Board, and the World Bank. I'm very grateful. And we have been advised by a group of people like David Weiss, Bob Willis, and other distinguished scholars. So I'm very grateful. This is a nationally representative survey. These dots are our counties. It's randomly sampled based on all counties, and larger dots are bigger population samples. So this is a representation of how the population is distributed across China. So we have 150 counties, and within each county, we randomly sampled 3 village level units. And within each village level unit, we did a census of physical dwellings based on Google Earth map, and then the dwellings are randomly sampled to get our sample. So this is, I've already told you the timeline of the CHARS, and an indicator of the quality, of the sampling quality, is how we compare to national census. And the national baseline was 2011, so we compare to the 2010 census. The red bars are our age distribution, and the blank ones are the census. As you can see, we match the national census very well. And this big gap, as some of you may know, is the Great Famine that killed probably 30 million people. The exact number is still under debated. So we do have the people. This is the surrounding this event. And our response rates are quite good. So these numbers are based on all the samples we issued. By 2014, the life history, based on all the samples we issued at baseline, we got 78%. And so I'm not going to tell too much about that because I don't have that much time. The life history survey was conducted in 2014. We followed the model of ELSA and Share Life survey, so they advised us on how we designed the survey. It's based on the event calendar history methodology where we had the national events listed on the screen, and then as we go on, the important events are added to the screen so interviewers can probe based on those events on what happened at that time. This is a comprehensive survey covering all important modules of a person's life, their education history, their rearing, their own marriages, childbearing, employment. So this paper will be mainly based on the employment history survey, where we recorded every job lasted 6 months or more for the entire history. And so we have a longitudinal data of each person for the history, and we constructed the employment rate for particular age group in the past years. So the first step, let me show you how the data, because this retrospective natural question is, do people remember correctly? So we compare with the published official census estimates, and we also compare with the micro data from census, and we compare with our own employment rates in our national baseline survey, 2011, and we do separate urban-rural comparisons. So there are differences, definitional differences with the census. Census asked, did you work for pay at least 1 hour last week? We asked, first question is, did you work at least 10 days in agriculture in the past year? And this is to account for seasonality in agriculture. Because in that particular week, the person may not be working, but that might be a slack season. So we had this question. And then for all who answered no, we asked the standard question, did you work for pay at least an hour last week? So because of this difference, Charles expected to produce higher employment rates. So these are the comparisons with census. The red lines are Charles estimates. As you can see, we do have higher employment, but the trends are similar with the census numbers. These were so the top ones are female and these are male. We're focusing on 3 age groups for women and men. They're not that same. We are looking at a female 45 to 49 because our retirement age for urban workers is 50. So that is the group that we see variations. And then men, the retirement age is age 60. So we're looking at before that age and after that age for men. Okay, so then we look at urban-rural differences. For the rural population, rural is defined by their registration status. Everyone is defined either as an agricultural person or non-agricultural person. Is basically determined by birth status. In our sample, about 1/3 of people are urban, most are rural. So as you can see, our own national baseline defined in about 2010 is very similar to our recalls. We do have higher employment rates for women, but quite similar rates for men. And then the urban residents, they're also quite similar, but it seems that census may underreport urban employment because unless probed, urban people tend to not report work, informal work as work. So overall, it seems that our life history data are quite good in capturing the past 15 years, past 25 years, I'm sorry. So this is an overall employment rates of men and women. I'm not going to talk too much because I'll show you in a moment the urban-rural differences. This is what I got from David Weiss. This is the world, the trend. As you all know, all these developed countries experience decline and then it recovered in recent decade. Our overall figure is about here. So in comparison to the world developed countries, we're pretty high. But if you look at urban-rural differences for men, so these are three lines. So these are, for these are men because we're looking at 50 to 54 and 60 to 64. So as you can see, they're very different. If you look at the oldest 60 to 64, the employment rate is just about 30 to 40% in the urban areas, but it's over 80% in rural areas. So they're like two different countries. The same thing is for women. If we look at 55 to 59, so it's just 20% among urban women, but 80-some%. So this says we should not be looking at the country as an average. We should rather look at these two groups separately. So this is rural. So we're reproducing the two graphs for men and women, but the scale is a little different, so we see the differences. The previous scale was too compressed, so we start with 75. Here you can see the trends. So it seems that there's a rising trend at the beginning of the 90s, and then decline quite sharply. The same thing goes for women. There is some increase in the beginning of 90s, and then since 2000, it has been a quite sharp decline. And urban employment, so it seems that it's an overall declining trend until about 2000 for women and 2005 for men, and then there's a rebound in recent years. So the rest. So this is where I was in March in London. That's when Zhang asked me to go further. I presented a few hypotheses. Now today I'm going to give you some detailed data to see whether those hypotheses are likely. So the rural trend. So these are the graph again. So I'm focusing on the rising at the beginning, and then the decline at the end. So the first possibility is the structure, is the compositional effect. Urban versus rural populations, because rural people are more likely to work, and if they shift to urban areas, then the rural rate will decline, the urban rate will rise. So we're going to first look at the switch. So this is percent previously rural, next year is urban. And the scale is 0.1% here. So it seems that very little shifting. It's not going to explain any of the trends. So now the primary hypothesis is substitute farm labor. As you know, the past 30 years or so, China has experienced very rapid urbanization, industrialization, so massive shift of labor out of agriculture, and has led to feminization and aging of the rural workforce. So from our life history survey, we can see that. So here we're looking at the same people, but when they were 30 to 34, so that's the, the red lines. So in the 90s, so we see that the exit out of agriculture was quite fast. It was 35%, so this is the youngest 30 to 34 age cohort. And then it was about 50 by then. These are our youngest cohort in the Xhao survey. We cannot go beyond because then they're not in the youngest one are not in our survey. And then the older ones, they are the one, the younger people went out first at greater rates. This has been confirmed in many of studies, including my own. And then women's rates are lower, but the speed is also quite steep. And the older people, 50 to 54, and the oldest one stayed flat, but then in recent decade, they have also started to get out of agriculture. So this is this general trend in the past. We've captured quite well. And here is that off-farm employment includes migration. So this graph shows the migration trend, the national trend of migration. This is an independent data source. So we do see the out migration, that is people going out of the counties to work, has been rising pretty fast. And in our survey, I'm not still sure whether this is cumulative or annual, so I'll skip this graph. So the hypothesis of substitute farm labor says if younger people are moving out, someone has to take care of the land. And it's the older people drawn out of not working to work in the farm at the beginning. As you can see, the three shapes, the green one is agriculture, and the orange is non-agricultural work, and the blue is not working. So they match quite well. The blue part match quite well with the green part. So that means they correspond. As, for example, as agriculture work goes up, the non-employment goes down. People are working, and you can see here they match. This green and blue area match quite well. So that means so that's consistent with my hypothesis that when younger people are leaving the land, the older people are substituting in to take care of the land. And the other hypothesis, as you know, China, the grandparents are responsible for taking care of the kids. So then we're looking at that hypothesis. So this is number of grandchildren under age 10. As you can see, there's interesting trends, especially the declining, very rapid decline. This is the demographic transition, the number of children declining, therefore their children that need care also declines. So as children, as you can see, as children are leaving, their children are leaving agriculture, the number of grandchildren are still pretty high. So the older people are going into agriculture to work. At the same time, they're taking care of their kids. They almost always leave their children behind in the villages to be taken care of. So they're a double burden. Another hypothesis is mechanization of agriculture. And this, I think, explains pretty much of the decline part in recent decade. This is a percent of planting and harvesting that's mechanized, that's done by machines. Starting from 2005, it's 26%, and now it's almost 50%. So there's a rapid mechanization of machines substituting for labor in agriculture in recent years. I think that is quite, and another one is income or wealth effect. People are getting richer, and then they want to enjoy retirement. So these are the national numbers of per capita incomes of urban and rural. The real income, this is based on 1990 prices. There is pretty big increase in past decades. Bigger increases in the urban than in rural. Nevertheless, the rural income has gone up quite rapidly. So might have also contributed to the declining labor force participation in recent years. Okay, so let's turn to the urban trend. I'm reproducing the graphs here to remind you what we've seen, this general declining trend in earlier periods, but then there seemed to be a rebound in recent years. The hypotheses are different. The rural side is almost entirely informal, with no formal social security. But in urban, there's a lot of state sector covered by pension, and the state-owned enterprises still employ a large chunk of all the workers. And state sector's behavior is different than the non-state sector. It's seniority-based wage. So when they reach retirement age, they're probably overpaid, so they want to get rid of them, the government sector and the state-owned enterprises. But the non-state sectors and informal employment don't have that kind of distortion. So when that non-state employment grows, that restriction is eased. So this is evidence of that, of the retirement rate policy. We see this hazard. The blue line is women. As I said, the retirement rate is age 50. So you see a big hazard of exiting labor force at 50 and 55 for college-educated women. And then the red is the men. They have it's age 60 retirement rate, and you do see this. But for rural people, there is hardly any spike. So it's not a state-dominated sector. So here I show the composition of urban people's employment. And the gray area is not working, and the green area is the state sector, including government and state firms. And the orange, we do have some agriculture, that is orange. And the blue is other firms, non-state firms, and this red area is self-employment. So you do see the self-employment, a rise in self-employment in recent years, and that corresponds to the labor force participation. So that says that it's consistent. The recent rise in labor force participation is associated with this rise in self-employment in recent years. And pension coverage here. We show the pension coverage, that is, you're enrolled in pension programs, men and women. Interestingly, we see I didn't know this before. We see a decline in pension coverage in recent years. I was quite suspicious of this, so I asked my staff to check, and they confirmed that no matter how you do it, we also conditioned on urban status at younger age, so it's not the compositional effect. So we see this decline in recent years. And that is given that informal employment has gone up, so this is quite consistent. So without the pension incentive, so it could be that people are working longer. So that is consistent. And another institutional feature of Chinese employment retirement is early retirement. Early retirement, at 55 years prior to the official age, for certain occupations, people are allowed to retire earlier. But it was used quite liberally in the 90s when many of state firms are forced to go bankrupt as restructuring. So as a way to ease that transition, government allowed the firms to give early retirement. So the Social Security picks up the bill in paying these people. So this is men, and the green lines are early retirement among 50 to 54, and this is 55 to 59. So you can see that in the 90s, we do have higher early retirement rates, but then in recent years, that has declined quite sharply. So this is the government curtailing this grant of early retirement to stop people from working, to stop people from exiting too early. So this might also be responsible for some of the recent rise in employment among these groups. And women is noisier. These red ones are college educated. They're small, quite small. And then the green ones are most people who retire age 50. So this is the right before the retirement age. And then you can see large rates of early retirement, but then it's also coming down in recent years. Another hypothesis is this compositional effect, that women are getting more education, therefore their retirement is declining because they are required to retire 5 years later than its manual workers. So we have the educational component, education structure. So the green area is no college, and the red is college. So you can see most of our workers in these age groups don't have college education. And there are interesting fluctuations. Some are related to Cultural Revolution. And then, but you do see that for the youngest men and the youngest women in our data, the education goes up. But that should not change because for men it's a universal retirement age. For women, we do see that the proportion of people with college education has gone up, and this may also contribute to the increase. And then the last one is grandchildren. Are there less grandchildren? Yeah, so it's similar to rural. We do see a very sharp decline in the number of grandchildren in recent years, and especially in this part, is also consistent with rising labor force participation of the women in these age groups. So the last hypothesis is their mortality selection. Naturally, in the 90s, our oldest cohort are that we observe are already in the 80s. So if people who work survive more, then we're going to see a steeper decline. And there is some evidence of this mortality selection, especially among men, because this is an urban hukou, proportion of urban hukou by years, given the age, I don't think there should be this decline. There should be more urban hukou people rather than less. So it seems there is some mortality selection, and the next thing we're going to do is try to see if we can construct weights to balance this out. So summaries, due to vast differences between urban and rural employment among older population, it's necessary to study the two sectors separately. The trends since 1990, labor force participation of older rural women declined by about 10 percentage points, and the rural men's decline was smaller. Among rural people, there were varying trends in the first decade. Mid-age and older men, mid-aged women, older men first increased work slightly before starting a long decline, and this decline seemed to be continuing. And urban trends, even though urban men, women started at much lower labor force participation, they had similar decline, about 15 percentage points. But this trend has reversed in recent years at about 2000 for women and 2005 for men. The rural trends explanations, the massive exit from agriculture by younger and male workers seem to explain the increase of mid-aged women, older men in the 90s. Since 2000, the mechanization of agriculture seemed to explain the withdrawal of older female workforce. An increased availability of economic resources and reduction of number of grandchildren are also related to gradual release of rural elderly people from hardship of farm and family labor. In urban areas, the state-owned enterprise restructuring and liberal use of early retirement policies seem to explain the decline of employment in the 1990s. But the rapid growth of non-state and informal sector employment tightened early retirement, and the large reduction in number of young grandchildren are all associated with delayed retirement since around 2000. Improved education attainment contribute to later retirement among younger men and women. So coming to my first question, what is the future trend of retirement? It seems that the declining trend, that there will be more decline in employment among rural people, which is the majority, and there is more room in encouraging more work among urban people, and the composition will be shifting toward rural, toward urban people, because a lot of these migrant workers will be retiring in the urban system. So the potential for work in for lengthening the working lives should lie in the urban sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Yaohui and John, for inviting me. Yaohui and I started later. I mean, we're academically about both started working on China development at the same time. We were working on sort of middle-aged rural and urban people and all the development issues that development economists worked on around 1990. Since then, Yaohui is doing this spectacular work on health and retirement system. If you go and see her operation in Peking University, it's like 2 or 3 floors of there, and you know she does the health and retirement system. And as you probably didn't know, China has every bit as much data as the United States has in all these rich sources to study these issues. None of them are available. They're all state secrets. And this is really the only data source that's out there. Now, since that time, she went towards the elderly. I went almost totally towards working on children and education, health, nutrition. And you know, I kept saying, I'm going to get this paper by Yaohui and really study it and go read all the citations and make some good comment. I think a lot of this stuff has been done in just the last few months and weeks, and so I got the PowerPoint a couple nights ago. So what I thought I was going to do is really try to think about some other implications of this of this work. And I mean, Yaohui's story is rapidly aging, really rapidly aging. There's these institutions in urban areas that promote early retirement. I mean, amazing, right? I mean, I'd be retired for already a decade, right, if I was in China. And but poor pensions in rural areas, falling pensions, underfunded in urban areas, but in general, it's a very rural society. And still low income. China is 80th per capita GDP in the world. We think it's a superpower. It ranks very low on per capita GDP. And this huge amount, if you look in these the graphs, this more and more of these elderly, are to support. Who's going to support them? Right? Can China change its retirement age? I've heard John give some really nice talks on retirement age in China, and he's saying you have to extend it, and you guys will all be working till you're 65, and hackles raised on people's necks, right? That there's a lot of pushback. I thought it was a lot of discussion that our own Social Security rules don't change very much because of its untouchable nature. It's going to be inevitable, but even if it does, it's only going to affect a small part of the population, this formal urban sector. So in my comments, I want to go through and really try to answer the question, who's going to support China's future? And to show it's a really difficult question to answer. Mainly because if we start extrapolating out all these trends for income, wealth, fiscal capability to finance Social Security, pension, health insurance, it all depends on sort of the productivity gains of China's economy. And I want to try to argue from the work, based on the work that I've done, is this is going to be really hard to do. The Chinese economy, completely of the collapse of the stock market aside, which I don't think has anything to do with the underlying economy in China, has a lot of challenges that are all embodied in these demographics. So what motivates these questions? It's Yaohui's figures, and she's gone over very well. I don't need to, repeat them. It's, rising employment of the elderly in rural areas and falling employment, the rise of those people that aren't working there. And it's not surprising, right? Because in the past, there's a participant here, it's sitting in there. She wrote a paper called "Working Until Dropping," and basically in rural economies everywhere, including China, you just keep work, and then when you die, you stop working. And I mean that's exactly sort of what was happening there, though we see that's changing. And why is it changing? It's just part of the graph. People are starting not to do agriculture and to work off the farm, right? These are her older cohorts, and they're moving in more and more into the wage-earning sector, right? And mechanization, she showed that, right? And these graphs are really remarkable because we get out to 2014 for men, and it's like no one's working in agriculture. I mean, there are no men 50 to 54 years old who are farming, right? I've done a lot more work, on this. What about these younger cohorts, the 44, 30s, 30, zero? I mean, that these guys have actually forgotten how to farm, or never farmed, right? And so there's this massive shift, especially for these younger cohorts, out of agriculture. So what are they doing? Well, they're moving, not formally, but informally into cities, working in low-wage manufacturing, working, off the farm. But it's really important, I think, this graph of Yaohui's is no one's integrating into the urban economy. They're going in there as guest workers, and then they leave. And so the question, I want to summarize this, as sort of drops out of, I think, Yaohui's stuff, is that we have this aging society that's mostly rural. Everyone's moving out of agriculture, young cohorts. No one's being integrated into the city. I mean, you have a tattoo, right? Rural, urban, and you enjoy almost no benefits of the urban society. And even though the recent regime has said we're going to do something about that, there's no movement towards that. So, how is China going to grow in the future? It's going to depend on productivity growth in this environment. It actually, if you look at 10-year-olds, this is the population census of 10-year-olds, and we want to see, who's going to support these elderly. These are the guys who are going to be doing it. You see that almost half, in fact, it's 51% now of 1-year-olds. So new babies that were born this year, over half of them are born in poor rural areas, which it's defined here. And less than a quarter of them, only about 22% of them are urban people. The people who get the tattoo on the right shoulder. And so you actually have to ask the question, how will China grow in the future? It's going to depend on whether this poor rural population can contribute to productivity growth in the future. And that's where, I think China is really in trouble. First of all, none of these poor rural people are going to college. They probably don't have to. I mean, these are sort of 4-year colleges. They're 13-to-1 over poor rural. But another thing that's not in that graph is China's college university attainment rate is the total labor force from 20 to 65 is like only 8%, 9%. It's less than 10%. It has the smallest cohort of college-educated kids in the world of any middle-income country, and there's not a lot of prospect for growth. But that's okay. Not everybody in an economy needs to go to college. I think in an economy like China that's trying to become high income, every kid needs to go to high school. Because that's where they're going to get the skills to work in the workforce 20 years from now, to be productive, to make China productive, to be able to give them the resources to support this huge aging society. And the reason why they need to do that is because of rising wages. This is by a visitor to SIEPR this year who published this in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. And you can see, why do kids today need to have high school level of training to get a job in the future? China now has the 7th highest wages in Asia, after Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea. It's almost caught up with Malaysia. Here's some work that we've been doing with a manufacturer of a certain type of mobile phone. Your mobile phone 6S the labor was $3 an hour to make that phone. Up from 50 cents an hour. So wages are falling. The World Bank just came out with projections of wages of about $10 an hour for unskilled wage in 2025. It's going to be, the unskilled wage in China, according to the World Bank, will be higher than the United States unskilled wage in about 2030 to 2035 because of demographic. And so remember, everybody is now going and working off the farm here, but of course that's going to go away. Samsung is moving all of its manufacturing base to Vietnam. The big question for this company that we're working for, is where is the iPhone 8 going to be made? And they're going to be gone. So now we have an aging society where everybody's moving out of agriculture. No one knows how to farm. No one's being integrated to the city, and low-wage manufacturing is leaving. Right? So how is China's labor force going to be able to move itself up this productivity ladder? Here's a wage worker in Portugal that makes made-to-order Gucci shoes, and he needs math, language, English, and computers to do his job and earn 13 euros an hour. We're doing work in China's factories. We're testing these women on their levels of human capital, and they barely know how to read and write. These are 20 to 30-year-olds. And why is it? Because less than 40% of junior high grads in rural areas, only 37%, actually even start high school. Now, this is the flow of human capital. We're now working with the census data right here and looking at the stock of human capital for the entire labor force, right, 20 to 65. And what we see here is that the share of China's labor force that's going to high school is only 24%. Only 24% of China's entire labor force has gone to high school. And if you compare it to, it's 1/3 of OECD, but it's the lowest middle-income country in the world. China is the lowest educated country in the world in terms of college and in terms of high school attainment. And it's even true of the low cohorts, the younger cohorts, 25 to 34 cohorts. And it's just a little bit better than South Africa. I know I need to stop, but it's worse than this. 1/3 of the kids drop out of junior high. Of course, it's high wages that are pulling them out. They barely know how to read or write. We've done massive surveys across these poor rural areas for elementary school kids and their level of human capital in terms of health. 27% of anemia. 1/3 of the kids have intestinal worms. 1/5 of the kids have myopia and don't have glasses. Their level of wasting and stunting. Their math scores are 3 years behind urban kids at grade 4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, these kids obviously aren't ready for employment in China's future economy. And then the final set of slides is remember, this is 1/2 of China's future population. What are the cognitive outcomes of these infants and toddlers? And this was a very large population-based survey of one part of the southern part of this province of Shanxi, where we gave these babies Bailey's tests, these IQ tests for babies. And by 24 to 30 months, 53% of these kids have Bailey's of under 85, which means they have IQs everybody here know, right? If your IQ, one hypothesis, your IQ is set by the age 3. This 85 Bailey's maps into a 90 IQ. So this is saying over half of China's future population has an IQ of under 90. I mean, this is just. And then if you add that to the normal distribution of the rest of the economy, it's about 33%, 35%, and what does that mean? So if you have this aging society and everybody's moving out of agriculture and no one's being integrated in the city and low-wage manufacturers leaving and you have a really, really low educated population, labor force, wow, who's going to support those guys in the future? I think that wish you could just turn around the demography and sort of pull ourselves back, but obviously we can't. So I'm going to leave it at that. Her work is phenomenal. It's also publicly available, right? And half the time, her staff will spend an enormous amount of time with people who want to use it to let them use it well. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks for this.
Kathleen Christensen from the Sloan Foundation. With all of the migration to the urban areas as in the last several decades, what's going to happen as they reach really older age? Are they going to stay in urban areas, or are they returning to the rural areas?
This is a very good question. The first generation of migrants are probably in their 40s and 50s. We don't yet see them retire yet. So, and most of these people have not participated in the urban pension system to expect a pension in urban. So I think it probably depends on their children. A lot of the children of these people are now in urban areas, working in cities. So I really don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, we've been surveying workers 20 to 30 and 30 to 40, and asking them, what are they going to be doing 10 years from now? And the 20 to 30 people answer, like 50 to 60% say, I have no idea, I never even thought about it. That's one of the answers. But the 30 to 40-year-olds, it's remarkable. 87% say, I'm going to try to be working for myself as self-employed. So, and then when we do interviews with them, basically what they say is, there's no, they see all the low-wage manufacturing leaving. I mean, they already know that. And then they see that there's absolutely no way that they're going to move their way up through any formal wage-earning employment system. And so then they say, well, you know, I've been saving like crazy. I have, you know, 50% savings rate, right? I'm going to take that back and invest it in my own business somewhere. And it's usually not in the city, though. I mean, many of them do want to stay, but I think that they think, you know, sort of like moving to St. George, Utah, you know, is the way you get your money to stress, and maybe they can do business better. So.
Most of these people have their houses back home, so they have the option to return. But I suspect since they've been used to the urban life,
they don't want to farm.
Right, they don't want to farm, and the rural living situation is not good enough for them. So I suspect they will stay. But the biggest question is the parents of these people who have stayed in the rural side for all this time, and all their children are gone. Who will support them?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that there is another survey that's housed next door to Yaohui, to the Charles survey, which is the Chinese Family Panel Study, which is indeed now publicly available. So I think and it's modeled on the panel study of income dynamics, and starts with all families and all of the members within the family, and is designed to follow people as they move out of the family and into wherever they go, whether it's to school or to factories and so forth. And so I think, and there's been quite a bit of effort to harmonize the measurements between the two, and there have now been added cognitive assessments, tested. The same test of fluid intelligence that's in the HRS is also now in Charles and in the CFPS. So I think there's a lot of room to start looking at some of these issues of development, because ultimately the capacity of a very small number of people to support this large, you know, one-child family is going to mean, if the children are successful and earning high levels of income relative to what their parents had, and in a world of 7% annual growth, they're going to get a big difference between the younger and the older part of the population. So I think that is possible. That it could be that's one of the aspects that may work more in favor of a future that is not quite as bleak as Scott suggested. I don't know.